In this video, we'll be talking about the suspension. So I'll be doing BC Racing custom coilovers. As far as suspension goes, I originally wanted to put in more here, but just didn't. The parts that I ordered, so I was trying to get a rear sway bar for it, and the sway bar I originally received was incorrect. And I think I'm just going to try and include the rear sway bar with potentially control arm changes and things like that, but that'll be in a later video. So for this one, we'll just be doing the coilovers, and I also was able to get some new wheels, or not new, used, but better than the original ones, at least as far as tire options go. So starting off, I'm just breaking the bolts loose in the rear. You know, this is pretty straightforward. I soaked them a little bit with some PP Blaster just to make sure that they were there's not going to be any issues removing them, because I don't want to buy new bolts. But again, this is fairly straightforward. And then from here, this is the removal process. That's a little bit tight in this particular section, so that's why I'm just breaking it free with the larger 3/8 ratchet, and then I'm using a 1/2 inch with an adapter to get this bolt loose. And one thing, this is the very first one that I removed. One thing I didn't realize, because this side of the suspension seems to be a little bit stiffer than the other side, just stock wise, is that you can actually just push down on the lower control arm, and then that will either push down or pull up to give you some leverage to take the tension off, which makes this strut slide a lot easier. So here you see me use a pry bar to just try and pop it loose, but if I had just, you know, pulled up a little bit or pulled down on the suspension, it would have just popped right off without any issue. And conveniently, there's a little groove right there in the brake line where you can just slide the strut assembly out. And from here, I'm just cleaning off the stud, and I'll just kind of show the differences between the stock and the replacement coilovers. So these are actually 300ZX or Z32 300ZX coilovers, just with a modified spring rate to suit the heft of the Q45. If you actually look at the strut body, it'll say 300ZX on it. So this is one thing I wanted to point out that I ran into. I didn't really see it mentioned anywhere else on the forums or on any of the community posts. So I don't know if anything changed or if it's something specific to my car, but this is what I did to work around this. So the front coilovers are contacting the control arms just barely, probably by like a millimeter. Like it's barely any contact, and I had this on both front setups. So what I did to work around this is I just used a spacer or a washer, and you can see the image there that shows the actual specifications if you run into the same issue as me. And I just put the spacer in first, and then put the coilover assembly in on top of that, and then that spaces it out enough so it's no longer contacting that control arm, and then that takes care of the issue. And now we're going back together, and you'll see the spacer that I'm using there, that'll go on first, and then the coilover will go in next. Overall, this process is very simple. The only thing I would mention that I didn't record here is that you do have to drill out the strut tower holes to be a little bit bigger. For some reason, again, this wasn't mentioned in the instructions for the coilovers. Again, these are bought through excessive engineering. They mentioned that you do have to drill out the rears for the rear coilovers and the rear strut towers, but it wasn't mentioned for the fronts. Maybe I missed it. Maybe something's changed. Either way, it's not a big deal. You can just drill them out really easily from the top. And again, it's super simple to get this back together. And then this is what I wanted to show after the spacer's installed. It's a little difficult to see because I have to get the light to shine back behind it so you can actually see the gap, but now there is actually a gap between the coilover and the control arm. You know, this may not be a big deal, but personally I don't like it. I don't like parts contacting when they shouldn't be. So there's still enough thread sticking out of the nut that there's no issues of thread engagement. So from my perspective, I think this is fine. I've driven it around a few times like this. There's been no noise or any issues like that. So I'm fine with this. And I think if you run into this as well, you know, this is an alternative you can use if you don't want that contact. And this is the right front going back together. So pretty much same thing you saw with the left side. No significant differences on this side. And now we start on the rear, and I only recorded one side. You know, this is very straightforward, and I'm not going to kind of filler out the video with a bunch of doing the same thing. For the rear though, one thing I wanted to mention is that this lower bolt might, you know, be different for everyone else, but for me, because this is a northern vehicle, this bolt was very stuck on there. Didn't want to release with an impact gun, so I was just using a long breaker bar, and that was able to get it to break free pretty easily. So in case you run into that, you know, a breaker bar is probably better in most instances for these, just because they're so old rather than an impact. And from this point here, I just need to lower the jack a little bit, get some tension off of it, and then that helps pull this bolt out the rest of the way. And then this is the comparison between the stock and the coilover. It's trying to capture here the differences in the size of the studs. You might be able to barely tell the difference, but unfortunately I wasn't holding them at the exact same height, so the perspective is a little off. But yeah, the stock studs are smaller, the coilovers are thicker, so you do have to drill them out. For the rears, I found it easiest, or really the only way, unless if you have a right-handed drill, is to just drill it up through the bottom up. You know, just center the drill and the bit, and then you can just drill it out from the bottom. It's no big deal. From the top, you're running into the rear parcel shelf, and you're kind of fighting space around the fuel tank. If you have a right-hand drill, then it would probably be fine. You might be able to get it in there, but it seems unnecessary since you can get to it from the bottom. So this is pretty much the last step for the coilover installation, is just setting your height roughly. You double check once you get it on the ground and the suspension's settled and broken in. But I'm just doing a measurement between the collars. I'm just going by the upper collar and lower collar, and I think my measurement is set to 4 inches. I'm not going for maximum low, I'm just going for something that's drivable. So like I mentioned before in previous videos, I'm not going for like maximum slammed or VIP or stanced out. I don't really care for any of that. I just want it to ride and drive fairly well, because again, the original suspension, I had a right rear strut that was leaking, and there's no real replacements available. So coilovers are realistically the only option you're going to get for doing suspension replacements on these older Q45s. And this is, you know, how it looks right now with the stock wheels and tires. I actually like the stock 15s. The problem is that the tire size, the stock tire size anyway, is there's basically no performance options available. You know, you basically just get bare bone basic tires, which doesn't really suit what I'm going for. And plus these tires are completely worn out, so I couldn't really drive it in any aggressive way to see how it felt with the coilovers with these stock tires. So then that leads on to the next part here. So these are the used wheels I was able to source locally. They're from 2008 350Zs. I think those are called the 350Z anniversary wheels. So I was able to find a set of these fairly close by. They've got some curb rash on them, and they're not in like perfect shape, but it's good enough. I was originally going to buy new wheels, but just didn't really want to spend that much money. The main reason I want new wheels on this is because I want better tire options. So these used 350Z wheels, you know, perform that role just fine. And you can see the new brakes that I have on here. So they have new rotors, pads, and actually front calipers because the fronts were starting to stick a little bit. I was originally going to do a video of that and include it in this one, but I just didn't really find it that interesting. And so I cut it out. You know, if anyone really wants to see it, I still have the footage. I can include it in a future video. But, you know, brakes are brakes. So I just figured, you know, people will figure it out. But yeah, I did front and rear brakes, front calipers. I might do rear calipers in the future because one of them is a little, has some wear to the seal, but we'll see how it goes. Overall though, driving impressions after driving it for a little bit, it definitely feels a lot better, a lot more planted. There are new tires on it now, obviously. I did adjust them. I think their base is set at 15, so you have a 30 increment adjustment. I set mine to 10 because they were quite a bit too stiff in my opinion, at least for, you know, kind of casual driving. That got them feeling a lot better and more manageable. But yeah, that's pretty much it for this video. The next one again will be more suspension most likely, and we'll go from there.